Hey everybody, Aiden Keller here, and I will be presenting my cumulative project today. Wait a minute, what's that? It's Dungeons and Dragons. Rationale. So research has been done on the benefits of play therapy and the use of imagination for youth. Research has also been done for the importance of hobbies as we age, as well as getting into our 60s or older. What is often lacking in the public's understanding is that play therapy, use of imagination, and hobbies can coexist for adults, while benefiting all individuals willing to partake. This comes in the form of role-playing games. Specifically, these tools can be utilized for those who are widely stigmatized, targets of sexism, misogyny, racism, part of the LGBTQ community, as well as neurodivergent individuals. According to research completed that specifically looks at role-playing games, the benefits for participation include building empathy, compared to sympathy, cooperation, camaraderie, social skills development, decrease of social phobias, increase in quality of life, aggression and impulse control, as well as a creation of safe spaces for self-exploration. Stereotypically, role-playing games are engaged by those on the edge of society due to their perceived lack of social skills rather than different or diverse set of social skills. Julia Tisch has compiled the following data on who would have been the most stigmatized group for numerous individuals during their high school years. As you can see, the graph shows that over 56% are stigmatized due to perceived of being a gamer, into anime, etc. The response should not be shocking. The term nerd stigma was coined due to this. Tisch continues to explain the other previously listed groups that have found a home within role-playing games, but drives home the main point that no one deserves to be laughed at because of what they like or who they are. Now I need to give you a short history of the game that changed the world. One of the most ubiquitous forms that fantasy tabletop role-playing games take is Dungeons and Dragons. The first edition was published in 1974 by Gary Gygax in a small box set of 3 pamphlets. As part of the Satanic Panic during the 1980s and continuing into the late 1990s, BAD, or Bothered Against Dungeons and Dragons, formed to remove D&D from publication as they saw it as a recruitment tool, seducing youth to join in satanic rituals as well as committing mass suicides. This did not hold up in court. Instead, research started and found that players had a much lower rate of suicide than their peers who did not play. Today, Dungeons & Dragons is in its 5th edition with an estimated 50 million players worldwide. Time magazine is the one who recently called it the game that changed the world. As far as the purposeful selection of this skill being taught to the client, they were already aware of 5e D&D and had previously even been given the corresponding 2014 version of the Player's Handbook as a gift from family and friends, but they had not read through it completely. Motivation is high in order to be able to interact socially with family and friends. For the baseline, the client provided a writing utensil while the clinician provided a player's handbook, as well as a blank character sheet, with a timer set for 30 minutes. When the client was ready, they were given the following directions. Today you will utilize the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Player Handbook to create a first-level character. This will be timed to a maximum of 30 minutes. When you are ready, I will hand you a blank character sheet and you may begin. Here's an example of the scoring system. The clinician had highlighted and circled needed portions of the character sheet, with the rest being blacked out as to not confuse the client. This totaled 62 individual items that each scored at about 1.63%. The usage of the 5e Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook can be difficult to those new to the hobby, but one of the first things to do is simply start at the beginning of the book. Keeping tabs on the index is important. The book is mainly organized into 3 parts, with the first part devoted to creating a character step by step, including the selection of a fantasy race, dwarf, elf, etc., classes, fighter, wizard, rogue, etc., backgrounds, and equipment. During the baseline, the client did not use the full time allotted and instead stopped at approximately 20 minutes. Scoring totaled at that time 14 out of 62, or 22.82% completed, with 58.9% accuracy. With this in mind, the short-term goal and long-term goal were set as follows. The client, in conjunction with the clinician, will complete 50% of a 5e D&D character sheet with 75% accuracy within 30 minutes. The client will independently complete 75% of a 5e D&D character sheet with 90% accuracy within 30 minutes. And the client will independently 100% complete a 5e D&D character sheet with 90% accuracy within 30 minutes. In addition to the previously listed short-term goals, the 3 additional short-term goals were added. The client will independently rate their accuracy at least once after filling in a 5e D&D character sheet. For example, I forgot to include that my gnome speaks Gnomish. The client will be able to also independently define the following key terms on a character sheet, such as ability score, character name, initiative, etc., as well as locate where they are. And finally, the client will independently create a Hero Forge 3D model of their character, matching the 5e D&D character sheet. For Teach Session 1, the client's objective was to understand and use the 5e Player's Handbook Index to find and note aspects needed to create a character sheet, making sure to use previously chosen aspects from the baseline, such as a Forest Gnome race and class being a Ranger. They also needed to add background, equipment, and a few other things. In addition, they were introduced to Hero Forge. This online tool can be utilized to create a 3D model in order to be printed out by a 3D printer. Many who play tabletop role-playing games use this to create their own custom 3D representations of their characters. Finally, the client was given a polyhedral dice worksheet to test their recognition of the various types of dice used to play D&D. As a clinician, my role was to provide feedback from the baseline, explicitly teach the 5e Player's Handbook Index as a resource for all portions needed to fill in the character sheet, as well as provide feedback upon completion. I also ensured that the client was aware that no dice will be used to create the 5e character, but that we would check to see if they recognize each type of dice instead. The results for Teach Session 1 included that the client, in conjunction with the clinician, was able to complete 96% of the character sheet with 77% accuracy in the time allotted. The client was also independently able to rate their accuracy, a total of 8 times. For example, if my favorite enemy is dragons as a ranger, shouldn't I know how to speak or understand them? And they did. This surpassed both short-term goals with target date selected for Teach 1. Due to the high rate of completion and accuracy in Teach 1, Teach 2 was modified. Rather than focusing on the character sheet creation, and in order to give better context behind the use of the applied knowledge for the short-term goal, being that the client will be able to independently define key terms, the clinician held an interactive actual play session with 2 guests who were active D&D players, as well as were aware of what the client was working on. While the focus does not include creation of a character, the created character from the previous session needed to be used during a game in order to fully participate. During the session, the client was given practice to understand and use the 5e Player's Handbook as well as their character sheet, while defining previously noted aspects relevant to Ember, their created character. The client will also engage in an actual play session before attempting the post-test. During the actual play session, the clinician and guests were available for scaffolding. They all kept in mind that the client also had the goal to independently rate accuracy. Actual scaffolding involved asking if the client was certain when second-guessing themselves on a correct statement, as well as pointing out certain parts on the character sheet for them to find and use. The modification supported client progress, as it grounded the work being done and gave it meaning towards an end goal, i.e. social activities with loved ones. In addition, having guests participate added to motivation in the moment. The actual play session included the use of manipulatives as well. The client made such statements when seeing the manipulatives, such as, "I love this guy," in reference to a plant creature miniature that was placed on the board, or "I don't want to fight that," in reference to a giant worm miniature when they peeked around the corner to see what was ahead. The client was also very engaged with the completed Hero Forge 3D model that was printed out by the clinician, as well as the green dice gifted to them that matched Ember. The client was given the results from the previous session. Using this, the clinician covered what was missing and highlighted where in the player's handbook this information was. A full independent data collection was not given due to the previous surpassing results. Instead, the client was verbally given the chance to correct said mistakes after it was discussed. With this opportunity, they were still able to complete 86.87% of the character sheet with a 94.48% accuracy in the allotted time. During the actual play session, the client independently rated their accuracy a total of 6 times, discussing their armor class as well as their weapons and equipment. In addition, the client correctly responded with 100% accuracy to 30 unique prompts that independently defined key terms on their character sheet. For example, during play, they introduced and described their character Ember to the 2 guests, hitting on the following points. Ember is a female forest gnome described as being very small, trained as a ranger, and was previously an artisan guild member. They are also described as a perfectionist. However, Ember is now an adventurer, driven to get revenge on a dragon that destroyed her place of business. During the actual play session, the client was given certain scenarios they had to respond to with a choice, as well as using the correct term for said choice. For example, the clinician said, "The evil plants plod forward. Make an initiative roll." The client then correctly responded, saying that they had rolled a 9 on the d20, as well as had +5 for their initiative, being a total of 14. This meant that they were able to go first before the evil plant creatures attacked, and were able to destroy them using their short swords. With these results, all short-term goals for this teach session were respectively passed. Using the LAM-mediated learning observation revised rubric, I highlighted in yellow for Teach Session 1 as well as in green for the second session. Almost all portions of the rubric increased from the first session to the second, except for anxiety, attention, compliance, problem-solving, task orientation, and nonverbal self-rewards. More reasoning for this is in the handout. The client did not fully meet the long-term goal of independently completing a 5e D&D character sheet 100% with 90% accuracy. Instead, the results calculated conclude they independently completed 98.37%, missing 1 of the options on the 5e D&D character sheet, with a 97.44% accuracy within the allotted time. This is not to say the client failed in the learning and application of a new skill in order to connect socially with family and friends. Instead, the clinician proposed a very challenging long-term goal, even knowing many who engage with D&D socially on a regular basis do not complete character sheets within similar parameters. In retrospect, the short-term goal started with appropriate progression. If more time had been fully allowed or an additional teaching session was possible, the clinician would have gone back more fully over a blank 5e D&D character sheet step by step as final preparation for the post-test. A form of scaffolding could have also included giving the client a highlighted blank 5e character sheet. Should the long-term goal have actually been set as anywhere between 90 to 98% completed instead of 100%, the client would have met their goal, while allowing them a small margin of error. If this project were to be repeated, the clinician would keep this in mind, as well as gauge the new client's progress with respect to the baseline results. In closing, I have some noted online resources that I used for this presentation. In addition, I thank you for your participation, as well as apologize for the length. Thank you.